What if your next chapter in life was the one where it all came together?
There's a whole relationship that we have with money, and I get to work with people who have a lot of it and are very happy. I get to work with people who have a lot of money and are very unhappy. I want people to be able to resonate with what we're talking about, and I want to offer hope to people that there is a different way of doing it. It's been a personal journey for me, and I came from a completely dysfunctional family around money. My father controlled us with money. I don't think he did it. He is past now. He didn't do it in a way that he was even aware of, but it was what he knew. So he believed if he was controlling the money, he could maybe make sure that we stayed around and we did what he wanted us to do. I don't think it brought him happiness, and it certainly brought us a lot of complexity in our lives. We have this concept that we have in our minds of, perfection, and what does perfection look like? And what that does is it causes us not to show up fully in our lives. And one thing that I've learned on this journey is nobody's path, as you mentioned in the beginning, is straight. And actually, we are perfect in our imperfections.
Well, welcome to this very first episode of a new podcast, Life Chapters, Money Choices. It's a podcast that I think has been quite long in the making. I'm Michael Avery, and in this series we're exploring the human side of money, not the TLAs, the three-letter acronyms, or the investment jargon, which are important, but the real, raw, sometimes messy, sometimes magical moments that money quietly shapes in our lives, and the conversations and relationships we have with money, because life doesn't happen in neat, straight little lines. It unfolds in chapters. Some are expected, some surprising, and every one of those chapters comes with choices. Financial ones, yes, but also deeply emotional ones. So in this opening episode, I'm joined by the person who's been pioneering this way of thinking in South Africa, the heartbeat behind this podcast, Kim Potgieter. She's a coach, she's an author, a director at Chartered Wealth Solutions, and someone who's really flipped the script when it comes to thinking about how financial planning is actually financial life planning in South Africa. And we're going to find out all about Kim's journey and why we've started this podcast as well. So there's a lovely metaphor, Kim, in your book, Retirement, around the kaleidoscope that you open the book with. And it invites us to imagine our lives through a lens that's always turning and always changing with the same pieces that can form an entirely new pattern. So I think just welcome on that note. Take us back to that first meeting we had at your office when you approached me with this idea to talk about the emotional and psychological relationships we have with money, because I thought it was a breath of fresh air. Someone who does this daily on radio, we talk all about SENS and the move of gold and what's going on in the geopolitical situation and in IRRs, but we don't talk about this kind of things. Why did you want to create this space for this kind of conversation now?
Thanks, Michael. I've written the 2 books, Retirement, Midlife Money Makeover. I've been working as a certified financial planner for the last 18 years. Every day I work with people, I chat to people about their life with money. And yet I still see there's such a confusion, because so many times the general conversation is all around this return on investment. And the reason I came into the industry was very much because I wanted to help people see money as an enabler. And I wanted to encourage more return on life discussions. And I'm not saying return on investment isn't important, because without this money, it's like oxygen. There's not much we can do. But there's so many layers to it. There's a whole relationship that we have with money. And I get to work with people who have a lot of it and are very happy. I get to work with people who have a lot of money and are very unhappy. People that don't have it, likewise, happy and unhappy. So for me, it's less about the number and more about what's going on inside you and what are all the dynamics of the relationship that you've got. And for me, the reason I approached you to do this podcast is I want to spread this. I want people not to feel alone. I want people to be able to resonate with what we're talking about. And I want to offer hope to people that there is a different way of doing it.
And that hope often comes in being vulnerable, in sharing our experiences, because often I think people have a misconception. You look up at people who are happy and have maybe found a financial sense of freedom and comfort, and you think, well, it must have been a straight line and it must have been easy, and their life, they must have come from a lot of money, and all of those things are complete myths. And you've written very openly about growing up in a financially very comfortable but emotionally constrained household. How did that shape your early beliefs about money and safety and control?
Well, it's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I mean, often when people devote their lives, I always say the work that I do is not a job. It's been a personal journey for me. And I came from a completely dysfunctional family around money. My father controlled us with money. I don't think he did it, he is passed now. He didn't do it in a way that he was even aware of, but it was what he knew. So he believed if he was controlling the money, he could maybe make sure that we stayed around and we did what he wanted us to do. I don't think it brought him happiness, and it certainly brought us a lot of complexity in our lives. So when I was a young girl, I was going to a private school and I was mixing with all of those kind of people. Yet at home, I knew that my school fees weren't being paid, that I couldn't go to a dentist and get an injection because we didn't have medical aid. So I used to have my fillings that way. I had the two worlds going on. And it wasn't like my father didn't have enough money, but it was just how he was working. He hoarded. We would go to Macro. He would hoard a whole lot of stuff at home. And when he passed away, I had to throw a lot of that stuff out. So it was his complexity that he developed, but how it impacted us. So how it impacted my mother, my brother, and myself. And with that, I made a whole lot of decisions. I mean, those were beliefs that I'd picked up, and I made decisions that nobody was ever going to control me with money. So a young girl like that, that's the kind of things that I was thinking about. And I think that's why I went to university and studied psychology, because I wanted to understand it more. And then only years later, I went back and studied finance because I thought I was going to be a psychologist at first. And I realized nobody goes to talk to their psychologist about money.
Yeah.
They go to a financial planner. And that's why I restudied the finance and then decided I was coming maybe into the financial planning industry in disguise. But I was still coming in because that was the way I was going to talk to people about money.
And we'll come back to the way you've been very courageous in approaching Andrew Bradley and a few others. It's it's really a hallmark of yours, I think, Kim, and just very courageous to write so openly about your formative years. I think many people have rather difficult relationships with money that stem from those formative years. And I just want to stay on that for a second longer, because there was a very vivid section in the book where you wrote about your mother not being able to choose what to cook, and you actually suffered burns in the bath and she had to run with you to the hospital because the car was locked away, and that was that kind of control. What did that teach you about the role of agency, especially for women?
So when I was younger and I was watching my mother, I used to be frustrated, and I'm talking about like a 16-year-old person.
Yeah.
I used to watch my mother and I used to go, you know what, really, Mom, just stand up for yourself. Why are you letting him do this to you? I mean, why would you ever let somebody have this kind of control over you? And then fast forward to when I had my first child and when I saw my own child, and I realized for my mother, it was so important that her children didn't come from a divorced family. She'd come from a divorced family. So yet she stayed in this so that she didn't have to impact us with her pain that she'd felt as a child. So then fast forward to me, I go into relationships always wanting to make sure that I've got the control. And yet all of what we do comes from our past and how we've been impacted, how we then create the story around what makes us safe and what makes us either a good mother or a good person. So you talk about that. I judged my mother quite harshly on it. And, now as a more mature adult, I look back at it and I just realized that she was just part of what we all go through, trying to be the best versions and trying to do the best that we can. She's not here for me to share it with her because she also passed on, which is sad for me, but I did get to share it with her. And I think, and why the work's so important that I do is because I think so many of us have a lot of these complexities and we don't really have anybody to share them with.
And both your parents, in fact, died quite young and quite tragically. I mean, your father in a hijacking, your mum after a short battle with cancer, and that must have shaped your urgency to live life on your own terms, because often we look at our parents, and my parents were certainly, they lived that way. Oh, we'll do everything we want to do when we retire. And my dad had his own business, DJ Motors in Jewel Street, that he put all of his retirement savings into this one basket. What do they say? Don't put all your eggs into one basket. It's a golden rule, but he did it. And his partner then ran away with the money. And in his 50s, white male, was in the early 90s, was almost unemployable. And it was a very difficult period for him until he died 5 years ago. And that kind of shaped my relationship with money because I didn't want to end up in that situation. So I've started saving for retirement almost from my first paycheck. But how did it shape your urgency around this kind of money relationship?
Sure, Michael. That story that you've just shared is one that I hear quite often about what's happened in their childhood and how it impacts them. And it will impact you all the way through your life. Maybe not in the same way, but through awareness and work, you can realize that it's not your reality. But for myself, and very much, you talk about how did it really affect me? My father was 59 when it happened. And I remember the next day looking on his desk, and there was a list of everybody that he wanted to invite to his 60th birthday party. And my dad was one of those people, and I know I had a hard childhood around money, but I loved him, completely. I remember looking at this list and thinking, we never got to do this. And so much of what my dad did was one day when I retire. And actually that was the catalyst for when I decided to go back and restudy financial planning, because that list and seeing that he hadn't lived his life to his fullest, I just went, you know what, I need to get to more people and let this not be their story. So for me, that was a huge thing that was the catalyst to me coming into the industry of financial planning. And then when I looked at my mom and I saw her passing away at 63 from pancreatic and liver cancer, I realized that she'd kept so much resentment inside herself. So much of her life was doing the right thing for us as children by not getting divorced, not rocking the boat at home. So what did she do was she internalized all this pain. She internalized it, she kept it for herself, and what did it end up for her? With disease. So for me, that what I learned from my father about sacrificing until one day when you're retired, and my mother like saying, you just do your lot in life and you keep it all inside, and that's how you end. Those are the discussions that I like to have with people. I like to encourage them to talk about their pain. I like to encourage them to talk about their dreams. And then when people, talk to me about like the one day, I go, no, today is the day. So yes, I think it has really had a huge agency, if you talk that way, about how I conduct my own life. So anybody who knows me will know that I love going on courses. I love traveling overseas. So I like to balance living now and thinking about planning for the future, because for me, I can't tell other people how to live their lives and share with them if I'm not prepared to implement it in my own life.
It's such a powerful lesson that around, especially your mother's lesson around just sucking it up and being a martyr and living quietly. And you think you're doing the right thing in that position. And this is not to judge in hindsight, because we do what we think in the moment is best for our children, in our circumstances, and we think we're being selfless. But we're actually setting examples for our children, other examples, money examples, relational examples. And sometimes doing what makes you happy is the most selfless thing you can do, because you can't give from a cup that is suffering internally half empty. And I think this is one of the themes we're going to unpack throughout the course of the podcast series. But I want to move away from that then formative period to then when you found yourself, you were running a catering business, was it? And from there, how did you meet Andrew Bradley, who I think is very well known in the industry? In fact, one of his books is sitting on my bookshelf, How Much Is Enough? But you just picked up the phone and called him, because that's what Kim Potgieter does. And you say, I want to work with people and their money. I just don't know how.
As I said, I thought I would be the psychologist and do it that way. Then realized it was through financial planning, and I started investigating who were good financial planners. I didn't actually like financial planners, to be honest.
They got a bad rap, and some of them deservedly so, right? I mean, you talk about life annuities that were sold with early termination and all the rest of it, and the pension funds adjudicator got involved. The old school ideas of this kind of very masculine man rocking up at your house with a briefcase, knocking on the door, selling you a policy, and then you never see them again.
Absolutely, and that had been my history. Look, things have definitely improved now, but that had been my history. And I picked up an article that Andrew Bradley had written, and I went, oh my gosh, this is a person who I think is a real financial planner. And I contacted him, and he very kindly granted me some time, kind of offered me a job. And I went, well, Andrew, that's not quite what I want to do. I want to change the industry. So I knew it inside myself. And then he said, well, I know these forward-thinking guys that own this business, John Campbell and Barclay Hall, maybe you could go go and see them. And I went to see them, and they were very sweet, and they just hired me. But unfortunately for them, they hadn't asked me a few pertinent questions like, did I like working with a computer, which I absolutely don't. So yeah, fast forward a couple of years and making some changes in their business, I became a shareholder, and I started having a huge impact on how we did things. And how we did things at Chartered was different because we brought in this concept of life planning. I didn't feel like we could be investing people's money, planning for them, if we didn't understand what it is they wanted for their lives and if we didn't understand their relationship with money. And John and Barclay were, fortunately for me, they were open to changing their business and they actually embraced it. And yeah, I mean, I've been business partners now with them for 15 years.
You had no prior industry experience, though. I mean, this is important. You studied industrial psychology and then clinical psychology through UNISA. How did you negotiate the self-doubt that must have come with retraining, starting over, and just carving a new identity?
I don't know, I was like a bull in a china shop, to be honest. There wasn't a lot of self-doubt because I still remember I had to investigate what you had to do to become a financial planner, and I read you had to do your postgraduate. I applied to the Free State University to do it, and they declined me because I didn't have the finance degree to be able to do your honours in it. Didn't stop me. They have a thing called a refresher, and for the postgraduate students, and I went to it, and the head of the university was at it. I waited till the end. I'm now friends with Wessel. I went up to Wessel and I said, Wessel, I've applied, you've declined me, but I'm coming to change the industry, so I would really like you to accept me to do my studies. And yeah, I did get let know the next week that I'd been accepted. I then went on, studied it, found somebody that helped me, and finished with quite a few distinctions even. But there was such a calling in me that I was going to go and help other families. It was never that I had to make a lot of money in it. It was really that I wanted to reach a whole lot of people. So it's what drove me. So I think if you talk about like my confidence was there because I wanted to help people.
You want to change the industry. I mean, that is your big, hairy, audacious goal. And it really is bold. It's really big. It's an industry that needs changing. And it's something that I can wholly support. What is the big issue, the fundamental thing that is kind of broken with the way financial planning was structured that you wanted to change?
Okay, so for me, it was that people saw money as the client. And it's not the money that's the client, it's the person that's the client. So I remember many years back, I was asked to speak at the Financial Planning Industry Conference. And I was going to hand out hot chocolates to everybody to show everybody that this was hot business. My business partner, John, said to me, Kim, you are going to embarrass us completely. I said, I didn't really mind because I just wanted people to realize that they were dealing with people's hearts and they were dealing with their money. They were dealing with their dreams and their emotions and their families. And I did that talk. I'm not saying that I got a good response from the industry, but fast forward 10 years, it's the way we've started talking in our industry. So as good financial planners, we are all talking around the clients are the people, not the money. And there's been such a shift that I'm very grateful that I've had these opportunities.
I think by now listeners won't be surprised to hear that early on at Chartered you phoned Mitch Anthony in the USA, who, for those who don't know him, is quite a doyen, and asked the same thing that you asked of Andrew Bradley. Tell me about that story.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll always be grateful to Andrew Bradley. I'll always be grateful to Mitch because Mitch, I literally, John had been at a conference in the States. He picked up this book, and in the book it kept mentioning Mitch Anthony, and he brought it back to South Africa to me. I went, oh my gosh, I need to meet Mitch Anthony. So what I do, I picked up the phone, I phoned him, and I said, Mitch, I'm in South Africa. My name's Kim. I think your work's incredible. I want to learn more from you. And he said, well, if you can get to the States, I'll teach you. And we flew to the States to Mitch, and he gave us a week of his time in his home where he taught us everything of what he'd created about life planning. And yeah, we came back and we implemented it at Chartered. And we've stayed great friends through the years because for him, it's been really nice to see somebody implement his work. You know, he was a philosopher, a creator of these concepts, but he didn't sit with clients exactly.
Right.
And at Chartered, we sit with clients, and we've actually implemented a whole lot of his exercises, personality profiling. your money story questions. And I think it's been encouraging for him to see this work actually in practice.
What would you say is that broader philosophy? Personality profiling? Is it just understanding the human, the individual, and the heart before we talk about the money in the head?
Exactly. And it's as if people think that their money is their greatest asset. And then I always say to them, but your greatest asset. So understand yourself, understand your history of how you've got here, your principles and your values that's brought you to this point. Like what transition you're going through, because we go through 60, 70 life transitions. And then what it is your vision for what you want to create. Because if you can get those foundations right, the financial planning and the investment planning all falls into place. And all of a sudden there's a why behind it all. And I've seen way more successful stories when you combine both, as opposed to just really having transactional interactions with your planner.
It's an industry that has and had become very transactional. And I think why so many people just turned off about the thought of going to see a financial planner, let alone, the stories of, the sharks out there and the bad apples. It's an industry that thankfully over the last 10 years, as you say, is starting to change. It's not there yet. And I'd like to maybe get you to share what your ideal version of the financial planning industry in South Africa would look like if you were to extend this out 5, 10, 15 years so that we can have better outcomes for South Africans. And I know you don't like getting too much into some of the numbers, but there is one number that, as a financial journalist, hasn't changed for the last 25 years that I've been covering the industry, and that's 6% of South Africans retire with enough money. 6%.
And you know what? I think it's even getting less than that, to be honest. And then we have to ask ourselves, so you ask what I want to see in the industry, we have to ask ourselves why that number's not improving.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the times why the number's not improving as well is because we're giving the same information over and over again by saying, you're not going to get there. You're not going to have enough. We're not saying to people, these are steps that you can do to better your situation. These are steps that you have within your control. These are empowering exercises that you can do so that you can have a better relationship with money, that you can have more confidence around working with money. So I think the old way of this fear of telling people they're not going to have enough, they're never going to be good enough, retirement's going to be awful, life's going to be awful, and then we're going to all die, is not what motivates us. And I think we have to look as an industry, what is a different motivator for people to get them to change their habits? Because at the end of the day, it's all just habits. It's the beliefs we've picked up, and then it's the habits that we then put in place, and then the results. We're not getting different results. Yeah. So I think we need to change the way we have these conversations.
Yeah, and that tired old marshmallow test about delayed gratification that if I have to discuss or hear or watch another time, I think I might throw up. It's about finding a different way of connecting with people. And I think a big part of what's been really impactful for me and what I think you've pioneered is this idea as retirement, not as an end, but as a rite of passage. And retirement is really about that, retiring to something. And that something becomes an entirely new chapter, not one of kind of winding down and kind of one foot in the grave. Where did that concept first start to emerge for you, that retirement is really about how we start reframing this conversation?
It was in my 20s when I was going to workshops and I was going to retirement workshops.
In your 20s?
In my 20s. I still don't understand why. It was just something that I did for fun.
There must have been a few questions asked when you were there.
Just to look around at the audience, I used to realize that I was a bit of an anomaly. But so there was something already there for me, and it was doom and gloom for me. And then you ask about, where did it come from? I shared with you how my father passed away, and he didn't get to even have his 60th birthday. And I wanted to reframe this whole concept of retirement. And I worked with Giselle, who was helping me write my first book, and she actually came up with the title of the book, Retirement, and she was great with words. And the minute she came up with it, I just knew it was right. And how to get more meaning from your life in retirement, because that word doesn't go away. We want to pretend it goes away, and I've heard other people come up with different words, but it's when we start our work, we're all working towards it. But now that we're going to be in it for 40 years plus, let's look at it differently. And for me, really, if you've got enough money and you've invested it properly, you get to choose how you live your life on your own terms and in your own time. Now, that's my goal. I don't want to stop working ever. I love working. I love contributing. So for me, that word just brought it all together for me so beautifully.
It really does. And you quote John Ruskin in the book, it's not how much you make, but to what purpose you spend. And I think that's really powerful. But you've sat across from hundreds of people at life's most vulnerable moments, transitions, divorces, deaths, reinventions. That's why we're doing this podcast. And we wanted to call it, I think, Chapters of Change, but the name was taken, so we're going to call it Life Chapters, Money Choices. I think it's a really great title, encapsulates what we're doing. What have those stories mostly taught you about what people are really searching for at the end of the day?
So I think as people, we are all, I want to say we're different, but we're all the same. We all do it a different way. We all want for things in a different way. But what we are all looking for is that we add value by being here. That just the fact that we have touched this earth and we have touched people's lives, that we've had an impact. And we are social beings, we are relationship beings, and I think just that recognition that we're part of this whole ecosystem together is really important. I mean, when I always share with people and ask them different questions, and the one is, what does money represent to you? For many people, it's like the security. But when we delve deeper, I hear the stories of relationships. I hear the stories of people that are important to them. And that's when I really realize that we are relationship beings. And what are people looking for? They're looking to be in good relationships.
Kim, I've got to ask you, if the Kim of today could go back and whisper something in the ear to the young woman who felt maybe silenced or unsure and financially dependent all those years ago, what would she say?
Just be kinder to yourself. I think in general, for me, I've always been one of these people that has been a searcher. So I've always wanted to learn more stuff, but I've also been hard on myself in the sense of, I've wanted to achieve more and more. And something that I've learned as I've got older is if you touch one person's life, that's enough. So I've calmed down the speed at which I needed to do all my work. And in that way, I won't burn out, because often when you're doing this kind of work, there's just so much work to do. So I'm energized by it. So I do it. But we're all human, and I need to take that time for rest and for doing this work. So I just would tell myself just to be kinder.
Yeah, because we're human beings. We're imperfect. We're fallible. And I think especially for A-type personalities, and I think you're quite an A-type, you're quite driven. You're kind of a blender. You've got all of these interesting characteristics that I think make you who you are, and why you've been so successful in shaking the baobab and getting the industry to think differently, which I find hugely refreshing. And I'm very excited to be launching this podcast series with you, most importantly because I think we don't have the right conversations about money in South Africa, be that cultural, be it deeply personal, psychological, what happened with our childhoods. But from your vantage point, as a last kind of thought to leave the listener with, why do you believe it's so important that we tell these stories and that we listen?
Because we have this concept that we have in our minds of perfection. And what does perfection look like? And what that does is it causes us not to show up fully in our lives. And one thing that I've learned on this journey is nobody's path, as you mentioned in the beginning, is straight. And actually, we are perfect in our imperfections. So when we can fully show up, we've got something to offer the world. Whereas if we're only offering a watered down version that we think the world wants to see, the world's lost out. So for me, very much, that's something that I want to share with people, and something that's been applied throughout my life. Whenever I think life's going according to the way Kim wants it to go, let me tell you, something happens and it changes that. When you go through these challenges, you have to learn how you pick yourself back up. So part of all the work that I do as well is a lot of these transitions are hard. And working with people to learn those skills to pick themselves back up is just as important as when we're in our successful part of our lives. And so, that for me is just hugely important, that people know that that's what the journey is.
Yeah.
That's what life is. And best we all just live in the messy middle with each other, support each other through it. And then I think at the end, what that'll do is bring us way more meaning than expecting that there's going to be this perfect life line that our lives are going to follow.
Yeah, it reminds me of that great John Legend song in the line, I love your perfect imperfections, all of me. And that's what we want to do. We want to bring all of ourselves, all of yourself. Thank you for doing that today. And all of the stories that you're going to be bringing in through the podcast of clients. Some people are not clients, but have just crossed paths with along the way, so that we can remind people that money is never just about rands and cents. It's about values, it's about heart, it's about freedom, it's about people, but most of all, it's about the choices that we make. And hopefully we can start to influence those choices and get people to think a little bit more deeply about that meaning. So in the next episodes, we're going to be hearing from people who can navigate all kinds of transitions, second careers, unexpected inheritance, divorce, reinvention, retirement, you name it. We're going to be doing this on a fortnightly basis. And I'd like to encourage listeners, if this resonated with you, share it with your networks. You can find it on all good podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, and just maybe we can get you to shift that kaleidoscope just a little bit to start thinking a little differently about money. Until next time, I'm Michael Avery. Thanks for listening. And remember, it's never too late to start the second half on purpose.